So, yeah, we will talk about how to use OWASP SAMM and DSOMM together, um, and what are the differences about it. I will be very honest to you, so I will also tell you where there are some things which can be improved, and for what target SAMM or DSOMM works better. This is more an introduction talk for people who are not so familiar with both, so you will get to know both maturity models. So we start with a small motivation. Afterwards, we take a high-level view on both models. Then we come to the usage and to a conclusion in the end. So we start with a introduction and motivation. Short about me, I'm a DevSecOps consultant. I am a lecturer at different universities. I'm in a lot of different open source projects. So that's why I'm not a core contributor, because I have so many other projects where I contribute to. So I have to distribute my time among different OWASP projects. Yes, for whom is this talk? This talk is for your security people who would like to uh, introduce security or improve the security in their organization. It's also, from my point of view, important for the technical upper management, like a CTO, and obviously for every developer, operator, or other C-levels who are interested and very enthusiastic about security. So what is DevOps? A very small introduction to DevOps. On the left here, we have the developer. On the right, we have the operations. So this, you see already DevOps, that is the shortcut. And DevOps encourages cultural change. That is the main thing. And Patrick DeBose, this is based on Patrick DeBose's definition. So they DevOps encourages cultural change to overcome the friction created by silos. So between these two here, there is a wall in between. In case you have multiple developer teams and multiple operations team, there is always some friction between these, and the target is to remove this wall and that they work better together. So it's about speed and fast releases. It's about independent teams where the teams can define in which way they would like to work. So we have different skills in the teams. Here we see the dev and ops, but for sure these people will have more skills in addition, or specific focuses. And it's about automate as much as you can. The problem statement when I first created the DevSecOps Maturity Model, and I think it also applies when you just cut off DevOps here, it applies to SAMM too, is how to enhance security. This is a bit in DevOps strategies and through DevOps strategies. That means that you might introduce new technologies, and they come with some threats. Or new strategies. And also, these strategies might provide the ability to use it. For example, when you use DevOps, you will try to measure as much as you can. You will have automated tests, for example, and you can make use of these existing data or the processes of automated testing to introduce security tests. And when you think about these two things, in the end, you have a lot of opportunities. And the question is, how do you prioritize this? So that's why you have a maturity model where you have a structured way of targeting the different activities, so that you start maybe with the ones which are easy to reach or which have a high value for security. So as you can see here on the bottom, to summarize what I said, these DevOps people, in addition, need to have somehow security knowledge in the team or guidance from a security architect. So what is DevOps? DevOps, from my point of view, has the following dimensions. So there is something like build and deployment, which is focused on building and deployment of applications or infrastructure. Then we have culture and organization, information gathering, hardening of, for example, a cluster, infrastructure, and test and verification. So now we clarified what DevOps is, what dimensions I personally see there. And now let's talk about maturity model in general. This is a definition based on Brian Glass, which you will also find on the already mentioned SAMM website. Brian created a comparison between DSOMM and SAMM, but this is a very generic introduction, which also applies to DSOMM. So what is a maturity model about? It's about analyze current software security practices, build a secure program in defined iterations, show progressive improvements in security practices, and define and measure security related activities. So basically you first see what is there right now, then you think about what are the next targets, and then you make sure that it's you don't stop at one time. It's a journey. It never ends from my point of view. So let's come after we clarified now what a maturity model is to the approaches you might want to take. To understand where SAMM and DSOMM is, we first need to understand where we on which level we are right now. We have here on the left a very high level down to the doing level where you actually do stuff. And in the start, often, especially when you're working in highly regulated environments, you have a so-called information security management system. When you don't have it, it's also okay. Then you can apply SAMM directly, and that will work fine too. The information security management system will make sure that you think about security, and a good way, from my point of view, to fit the requirements is to use OWASP SAMM, especially for the hosting and software parts. And SAMM, as we have heard already from Weber, has different practices like implementation, governance verification, and some others. In the DevSecOps Maturity Model, we have the dimensions we saw already, like build and deployment, culture and organization, and test and verification. And often they have a match. This looks a bit more pretty than it is. Actually, sometimes you have SAMM practices implementation, which are going to activities in another dimension, but basically in the first we can think about it in this pretty way. And in the dimensions you have different activities. This is an example of the dynamic devs, where you have in SAMM the part verification. In DSOMM it's called test and verification, and in DSOMM you get a very detailed guidance on how to actually implement dynamic application security testing. So you start with a simple scan, then you can use different. You might need to use different rules in your application, which you need to spider or at least to configure it. Then you might want to make use of JavaScript, because modern applications are always written with some dynamic parts like JavaScript, which needs to be executed. And obviously there are in all in SAMM and in DSOMM more practices, dimensions, or activities. So this is just my view. It's not the view necessarily of SAMM, but this is how I use it. I'm not using SAMM every day. I use it. I think I perform SAMM assessments around 4 times in a year. So I'm not a daily user of SAMM. So this is just my personal definition. So SAMM is, from my point of view, to assess the maturity of the organization, and you assess it to talk about the management afterwards. You don't want to talk with technical people. From my point of view, you want to talk with the C-level management or with the board of that organization. You might, I would take it in brackets, talk with engineers about it, or with CTO. So you get a spider web diagram, and you can easily talk with the management about it without too much details on how you assess, and you don't need to go down too much. in DSOMM, we also have the ability to map activities down here to ISO dimensions. So there is kind of a mapping between them. That is very important for highly regulated environments because they mostly need to fulfill ISO 2701, and this gives them the ability to easily do that. So what is DevSecOps Maturity Model? In comparison, SAMM is kind of, I would call it, industry standard. So it's a lot of people use it, and DSOMM is more emerging. So it's more, I do see I do get some requests. How do I perform a DSOMM assessment? Especially in Australia, it is used a lot. And yeah, that is one difference here. You get a higher level overview from in SAM, and in DSOMM it's more, as we have seen, more related to the doing. So it's a low level overview. You get it more with a technical view. As I said, SAM is to talk with the management about it. It also includes a lot of government compliance and governance, which you don't see in DSOMM. Actually, there you will see later that there is uh, no activity related to compliance and governance. Um, we can plan high level targets, and in SAM, you from what I know, there is no mapping to either right now. In DSOMM, we have only the DevSecOps related topics. um, we can plan concrete targets, while with management you go more in the direction, I would like to enhance testing, and you don't talk about which testing too much. Maybe you define it should be dynamic application security testing, but what you do exactly is not plan. That is when you can take DSOMM into account to go in more detail. This is the mentioned, this is a mapping from DSOMM to SAM, yeah, and also to ISO. You can also see it here on the right. So we have, I made it a screenshot of it and removed the bottom here so that we can concentrate on two examples. We have here the dimension build and deployment. The subdimension in both cases is build. We have here two activities like the defined build process. Then we have the mapping to SAM, so it's implementation and secure build. The stream A, and it's maturity level 1 here. And we also have the mapping to ISO. I have the ISO not in my head. I'm sorry for that. So it's 12.1.1. It might be hosting or security. I'm not so sure. I'm not an information security officer. But when there is a new activity, we often take I often take into account that I look into the ISO, or there are some collaborators which have more knowledge, which give me guidance on that. So what are the target groups? As I said, SAM is more for the C level, and in DSOMM, I can actually talk with engineers. That is the most important thing. I can talk with the engineers about the concrete targets and give them tasks. So and also the representation is different in SAM. Mostly a traditional spider web diagram is used, while in DSOMM I use as you can see here on the left, a diagram which is a spider, which is a heat map in there to identify where I have weak spots, for example, in maturity level 1. There are different approaches how you can use it, top to bottom, team independency by maturity, or interactive with teams. They are not defined in any literature I could find. That are the approaches people I talk with are using. So top to bottom means that you define the targets with SAM, you define the targets with the management. You say in the next 3 months or in the next year, or in the next 2 years, I want to have dynamic application security testing with a very high maturity. And then you go to DSOMM and define the activities together with the engineers. In other approach is that you do it more on the team level. Pre-requirement always is that C-level is convinced. So here we had it directly that we talked with the management about it, but here I would call it a pre-requirement. You always need to get a commitment from C-level, otherwise everything you do is useless. So you need to have a definition of maturity levels for teams. Every team could be different. Often you have something like belts to highlight how mature a different team is. And another approach which I have seen is that you are doing it interactively with the teams. So you're sitting down with the teams and say, what are your targets for the next 6 months, for example. This is an approach which so far I never got the feedback that it worked. In case you want to do it, my recommendation is that you give them only a predefined set of activities so that they have very little to choose from, because the difficulty is that you need to talk about every activity with the teams. So you have a 2-3 days workshop just to explain all the activities. So it's better to pre-select and only talk about the activities which are actually which you think which are useful for the teams. DSOMM always needs to be adapted, while SAMM can be used out of the box from my point of view. As I said, it's a different representation here for DSOMM. In SAMM, you mostly have these traditional spider web diagram, while in DSOMM, I choose this way to highlight maturities, because now you see here is a white spot. There is nothing, while here is something on level 2. That means there is something going in the wrong direction, because the target is to first do everything on maturity level 2. You have a basic understanding of security, and then you enhance the maturity level and do all the activities from the next maturity level. There are some pre-requirements. I have to hurry up a bit because I have only 1 minute left. There are some pre-requirements before you actually start. So you need to have, you need to onboard product owners. You need to know the security policies, and this is actually mean that also the team has to use it, not only you, also all the teams you want to target. Then you, in case you're using belts, you need to review the activities in the belts or in the maturity level you have defined. So this is taken here from the UP Secure NRW research project, and they defined these different requirements.
Timo, can I quickly interrupt? You have more than 1 minute left, because you started later. You can easily spend 5-6 more minutes or so. So don't worry. All right. Okay.
All right. Then I will slow down a bit again.
Okay. Perfect.
So let's come to the usage. So how is SAMM structured? We saw that already from Weber. You have a business function, which is kind of a category. Then you have security practices, which are kind of subcategories. Then you have different streams, A and B, for different, which are logical flows, and divided into 2 streams. And so basically 2 different topics in one security practice. And then you have the maturity levels, and higher means you're better. So you have maturity level 1, 2, and 3. Now let's take a look at DSOMM. It looks pretty much the same. You have DSOMM dimensions. I call it a bit different, but it's very similar, which are kind of the categories. Then I have sub-dimensions, which are the sub-categories. And then I don't, as you have seen in SAMM, there is here streams. These are not there. In DSOMM, we go directly to the activities, and again, they are sorted in maturity levels, and a higher maturity level means it's better. Right now in DSOMM, there are 4 levels. I'm thinking about to have a level 5 to give better guidance on what to do first, because level 1 and 2, there are already so many activities that I think it would be better to have a 5th. And we saw already there is actually, even if it's not written down, kind of a level 0, the pre-requirements, because before you start with using such a maturity model, you need to make sure that you have management support. You need to make sure that the product owners or the risk owners are on board. Yeah, this is the representation of which you could choose for SAMM, with the governance, design, implementation, verification, and operations. And in DSOMM, we have build and deployment, culture and organization, information gathering, hardening, and test and verification. I choose to use the DevOps dimension, which I have shown first, so that it's easier for engineers to relate to the categories I choose. How does it look? This is an example. This is the activity reduction of the attack surface. This activity is in the build and deployment dimension. That has a subdimension patch management, and the activity is called reduction of the attack surface. In DSOMM, you have always defined the risk and the opportunity. So what is the threat you're facing when you're not doing it, and what is the opportunity you can, in other words, the control which you can perform. So here you could remove not needed components, or even better, you just use the components which you are using in an image. So you copy from another image only the necessary files. Here on the bottom, we have the SAMM mapping. So we see that this is in operations, environment management, stream B, maturity level 1. I have told you already very quickly about the maturity levels in DSOMM. I think we can go very fast through this. So you have a basic understanding in level 1, and then it goes down to advanced deployment of security practices at scale. From my point of view, this is more a catchy name, because at scale that depends on the point of view, if you can see how it scales. But this is a catchy name, I think. White spots I explained already. Let me take a look at the time. I will do this a bit more quickly. DSOMM is, as I said, from my point of view, created to talk with the management about it. So it is very, very structured. There is always this theme here, so that it's easy for the management to follow. In DSOMM, I'm not following the schema, so we have here build and deployment. Here we have level 2, and there is nothing inside. That is something you won't see in SAMM. But I choose that when I go down to the technical level, it's okay to have nothing here. In case I can't think about any activity which would fit here. As I said, there is a mapping between SAMM and DSOMM. These are examples for missing of practices in DSOMM. So there is, you see it mainly, it's policy and compliance with this mission, which is missing here. So there are no activities for that. But there are also good news. There are a lot of activities which actually map to SAMM. So this is the view from SAMM and how many activities are there in DSOMM. This is a very, very new Robert Polly created a database where we loaded all information from SAMM and from DSOMM, so we could perform data analysis. And as you can see, on SAMM level 1, 2, and 3, we have nothing in governance, but therefore a lot in verification and operations. I have also a more detailed comparison here, which you can take a look at later in case you're interested. When I analyzed it, as I said, it's very new. I created this slide day before yesterday and started to analyze a bit. So what I figured out is that in SAMM level 1 and in operations, you have 32 matching activities. So that is very surprising, because I'm actually targeting in DSOMM that you have a easy start. With an easy start, I mean that there are less activities on a lower maturity. So here the mapping is, I think, wrong, and I need to work on it to make it better so that a lot of these will move into SAMM 2. But also you see that on SAMM level 3 there is not a lot. That is because level 3 is mostly about processes. That is hard to match. I have to think how to do that, or we have to think as a community on how to do that, because it's more about the processes. Here's an example from SAMM level 3, where we have developed and use management dashboards, reports to track compliance with patching and processes and SLRs. So that's hard to define in one activity. That's why there is so less on level 3. Maybe that is something we can catch with DSOMM information gathering, but there's definitely more analysis needed. I will now quickly come to the conclusion. So we need to assess and plan our security strategy, basically, from my point of view, with SAMM. Afterwards, we talk about what actually do we want to reach. So there, I recommend to use DSOMM. And in case you want to use DSOMM alone, it will always be only 80% of your security, of your secure DevOps strategy. You will always have to adjust it. Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
So far, we haven't seen any questions in the chat, but please, everyone following, post your questions right now, and we'll relay them.
Yes, now's the time. So if you have any questions for Timo, please put them in the chat window in Zoom. If you're following with Zoom, I see there's somebody raising his hand. So indeed, if you have a question, you can also raise your hand. We see somebody raised his hand, but I can't see it in the interface. Best to put your question in the chat window. That way we can relay it to Timo. If you have, I see a question in the Q&A. No, that's not relevant. You can also, if you're following on YouTube, post your questions there. We will definitely also copy paste them.
So we have a question from Volodymyr. I'm hoping I pronounced this correctly. Does it have sense to somehow relate to ASVS?
Yes, absolutely. Let me quickly, my screen is still shared. Absolutely. That was a problem in the start. So I defined DSOMM in a way that I said that is something others are taking care of, pure application security. But I heard a lot of people saying, I use a DSOMM alone without any other application security guidance. So that's why we should find it here already. Yeah, we have here application hardening, and what I define in application hardening level 1 is that you actually use these standards here on level 1. Because they mostly define application security related activities which are not covered here, because then I would need to write it completely new, and that is not my target.
Okay. I have another question in the YouTube chat. So how to check DSOMM for my project? This is from Guaraf. Is there any guideline to follow?
Is there a guideline to follow? That depends on your role. So in case you're a developer, I recommend that you in DSOMM, as you would do it in SAMM, try to do the activities from level 1. So, and when you have finished all from level 1, you can go to the next one. After some time, you need to see where do I want to get better. But in the start, I would always start just with level 1 and do all the recommendations from level 1.
Another one from Sergey. Is it right that we need to close all MM1 level and only then start working with Maturity 2 level?
Oh yeah, that is a tricky question. Sometimes it makes, for example, sense to skip some levels. For example, when we go down here to consolidation, consolidation here. A target is, for example, in the end, when you have different security scanners, that they are pushing their results in a vulnerability management system. In the start, you would do it always in the tool itself. So you would try to find a simple false positive management here. But in case you anyway have the target to use multiple scanners, then you can directly jump to the vulnerability management system from my point of view. Otherwise, mostly it doesn't make sense to skip something. It might make sense to think about, is this for me really level 1, or should tests of server-side components be on level 2? So that is thinking you should do. But to skip without a reason, I would find it difficult, because this maturity model is based on expert knowledge, where I interviewed others, and also SAMM is based on expert knowledge. So it would be hard to just jump. In SAMM, I think it's harder to just jump, because it's more built on top of the activities. When you want to jump to 2, you mostly have 1 to be there. In DSOMM, it might be easier to jump. That's why I also choose this heat map, so that you see that you're doing something wrong.
Okay. I have another question from Ivan. So in DSOMM, I hear teams, and I interpret this as fixed development teams. Have you seen this model or similar being used to assess short time-bound engagement teams like found in tech consulting?
Once again, I have to read that again.
Okay. Shall I post it in the chat? Or you can see it. Oh, Timo, are you muted?
I'm there. I'm just I'm thinking about that question. I actually can't grab it so much. Can you ask it in another way?
Yeah. So even if you can please reformulate. Shall we go to the question of Gaurav again? So how should I check the maturity level of my project using DSOMM?
Yeah, in SAMM you have, I think somewhere there is an Excel sheet which can be used. In DSOMM, I'm using here these implementation levels tab, and then you can click here, and it becomes more green or less green depending on the click. So blue means it's not implemented, green means it's implemented, and there is a selected data.csv in the repository. When you make that read only, no one can change it, but you can still take a look at the maturity of your team or your organization. And this is how I'm using it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we have like time for one more question. I think there's from Volodymyr in the chat in Zoom. The following question, Timo: do you believe we can somehow align DSOMM with ISO 27001 activities within an organization that maybe have already certified against that or not?
Yeah, align is a nice word. Let me see. I think need to go to the maturity. So this it's not. No, here it is.
Yeah, at the bottom. Yes.
What I'm doing is that there is already the mapping. So what I need to provide to the chief security officer is a way that he can have evidence for the auditors. So one way is this mapping tab here, where you can say, where you can tick, you would only have the performed activities here. Then you only get the ones which are done. And then I'm using this application to actually store the evidence. So here we have also evidence. This is something I overwrite per team or per organization, so that I put in here the screenshots the auditor would like to see. It's always, they are not used to that, to see evidence in such a structured way in an application, but so far we could convince every auditor that this is a good way. Is that somehow answering your question?
Yeah, yes, thank you. So I see there's some couple more questions. What I propose is that that we do any follow-up questions on OWASP, the OWASP Slack channel afterwards. Thank you very much, Timo, for your presentation here and the answers.